Hello students, welcome to ABHIRAM IAS. This is Sandeep Reddy. I have been teaching Indian economy since from last 4 years. In this session, let's discuss about some of the important areas where we need to focus more for your upcoming prelims examination, especially for 2025, and it is equally relevant for your UPSC mains examination. So, according to the previous year trends especially, the majority of the questions were majorly coming from your government sources, whether it is in the form of PIB or budget, economic survey and year-end reviews of different ministries. So, in this class, let's discuss about economic survey. So, what is economic survey in generally? It is nothing but a preparatory documentary which is headed by the Economic Division of Department of Economic Affairs under the Ministry of Guidance with the guidance of Chief Economic Advisor. Here the Chief Economic Advisor is Ananta Nageshwaram. As of now, what he will do is he will simply guide the Economic Department of Economic Affairs to prepare the document which is related to economic survey, which is under the Union Finance Minister, and also it needs to be present to the both houses of the parliament, that is Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So what is this report all about? It is a report on the economy in the preceding year. Preceding year is nothing but your previous year. And also at the same time, what are the different policy objectives have been taken up by Government of India, especially in last year, and their implications are present here also. And at the same time, economic trends and providing outlook for the coming year. So here the discussion is revolving around the previous year and at the same time present year. So what were the previous year policy decisions taken by Government of India, and at the same time what were the effects of these decisions on next fiscal year. And at the same time, if you look at historical background of economic survey, it was first presented way back in 1950-51. Before 1964, it was presented along with the budget. So if you look at economic survey and budget, these were presented at the same time when it was 1950 and 51. After 1964, it was separated into two parts. After 1964, it was separated into two parts, and two parts will be presented one after another. And if you look at a key difference between economic survey and union budget, if you look at previous year questions, especially from UPSC prelims point of view, they have been asking different types of questions, especially regarding the economic survey and at the same time budget. So there is no term concept of budgeting constitution itself, right? It is an annual financial statement under Article 112. It is annual financial statement under Article 112. It is constitutionally required for any government to present before the parliament. And if you look at economic survey, it is not mandatory for any government, but in generally these analytical document and having a different chapters, especially on different sectors and what are the different policy recommendations and economic forecast. These are all in generally presented to the parliament also. So it is not constitutionally mandated, but generally it is provided. It is released day before the budget. If you look at economic survey, or else if you want to understand it in clear terms, E after union budget, right? In a simple way, you can understand. Economic survey will be published, and after that union budget will be published. Annually on February 1st, the union budget will be presented. And what is the purpose? The purpose behind economic survey is nothing but analysis of past year's economic performance. Here, Indian economy performance. How Indian economy went through in last year, And at the same time, what are the different types of policy recommendations that have been given through different types of policies. And if you look at union budget, it is nothing but a detailed financial statement of revenue and expenditure for the upcoming financial year or fiscal year. So here under budget, revenue and expenditure components will be discussed for the upcoming fiscal year. And who will prepare? It will be prepared by Ministry of Finance under the Chief Economic Advisor guidance. And union budget, when it comes to union budget, there is a separate budget division under the Department of Economic Affairs, DEA. So these ministries or departments are also very important for your prelims examination. And when it comes to constitutional requirement, is it really required to present the government for both economic survey and budget? Obviously not. Economic survey is not mandatory, but constitutionally mandated Article 112 under annual financial statement. And what are the major contents that were present along with the survey and budget? Analytical document with chapters on different sectors in the economy and what are the policy recommendations for these sectors, and at the same time economic forecast, whether economy will be growing in faster phase or slower, or different types of modulations regarding the economic forecast will be discussed on the economic survey. And financial document with detailed allocations. Each and every budget, whenever any budget is presented in the session, obviously different ministries have been allocated with different types of allocations, means resources. And at the same time, what are the tax proposals? If you carefully observe these tax proposals, each and every budget time there is some tax proposals, whether up to these percentage, 0% taxation or 5% taxation, 10%, 20. So these are the some of the tax brackets under which whether these people under tax basis will be increased or not, that will be discussed in the budget itself. And at the same time, what are the revenue expenditures of the government, especially? So what are the government's revenue expenditure? Not only expenditures, even revenues. So here the both components of expenditure and at the same time revenue components will be discussed in union budget. And approval, who will approve this? No parliamentary approval is needed for economic survey. So obviously there is not mandatory, and it requires approval from both the houses of the parliament. So let's suppose if budget was presented during the session and at the same time it was presented in parliament in either house of whether Lok Sabha or Raj Sabha. Let's suppose it is not being passed by both the houses, then what will be the consequence? Obviously the government has to, the incumbent government, whatever the government present at whether state government or union level, obviously they have to step down. Why? They don't have majority to pass the bill. That's the consequence. And what is the nature? It is analytical in nature and generally it is advisory documents. These are not binding on any government or any government ministries. It is financial in nature and at the same time it is a prescriptive policy document. And what are the key features? So under the economic survey, mostly we will focus on GDP growth of the nation and employment trends, whether employment or unemployment, and sectoral performance, agriculture, industries, services, how these sectors were performing. And when it comes to union budget, infrastructure development, mostly capital expenditures, whether government is creating any infrastructure development, whether incurring any capital expenditure or not. At the same time, healthcare and education, social sector initiatives, and tax reforms, whether tax brackets have been reduced or not, that will be discussed, and social welfare also. So when it comes to impact, it influences policy decisions and academic discussions also, and it will directly affect the taxation system. Direct, indirect taxes. So whenever any budget is going to be present to the parliament. Obviously most of the people are aware about their taxation proposals, whether these people will be fall under the tax brackets or not. That will be your taxation proposals. And at the same time government is giving any subsidies to create a employment opportunities and government spending. Next, what is the scope? The scope here is nothing but last year's economic performance. Based on last year economic performance it will be, and for the next upcoming fiscal year and financial planning will be done in the budget through allocations. And what is the legal status? Legal status is it is not non-binding. If you don't want to present to the economic survey to the government, obviously there is no legal binding. It is non-binding in nature. And when it comes to budget, it is legally binding and requires parliamentary approval from both the houses. And public availability, available to the public through publication division. Publication division. You can directly purchase these economic survey and budget documents through government portals itself. And at the same time duration 1 year, providing a review of the past fiscal year. So let's suppose 2023-24. So what was the Indian economy situation during these last 1 year? That will be the review. That will be done in a review, and at the same time past fiscal year performance will be calculated. Here 1 year outlining plans for the upcoming fiscal year. So for the 2024-25, what were the next plans for the upcoming fiscal years will be discussed in budget. So before 2020, especially if you look at economic survey, till 2020 it was presented in 2 documents. Later from 2021 onwards it was presented only in a larger volume of book, that is known as economic survey. So generally these economic survey consists of 12 to 13 chapters. So in this class we will discuss about each and every chapters, important keywords, and at the same time what were the chapters that were going to discuss. The first chapter is state of the economy getting back into the fast lane. So what was the meaning of this statement? So after COVID-19 years, the economy of not only India, even rest of the world economies are also facing different types of recoveries. So it's been already 4 years completing the COVID years, right? After these 4 years, what was the situation of India's economic growth? That is to be discussed with respect to the rest of the world economies, whether these would be advanced economies or low and middle income economies. That will be discussed in the chapter 1. Second one, the monetary and financial sector developments, the cart and the horse model. So obviously the government of India has its fiscal policy, and at the same time RBI has its monetary policy. So what was the purpose of these policies? Obviously to promote growth and at the same time to control the inflation. And if you look at monetary policy objectives and fiscal policy objectives, these are sometimes contradictory in nature. Why? So on one hand the government is wanting to RBI to promote growth, economic growth, by lowering the interest rates, by reducing the reserve ratios. On the another hand, whenever any economic growth is happened, obviously it has to be coupled with inflation. That's why most of the times economic growth always coupled with inflation, right? So that is the monetary and financial sector developments. What are the different areas under the monetary and financial sectors, whether they have been developed, are there any challenges, are there any opportunities to grow in these sectors? That will be discussed in chapter 2. Chapter 3, external sector, especially foreign direct investments. Whether India has received foreign direct investments or not, that will be discussed under external sector. Chapter 4, prices and inflation, which is exclusively the domain of RBI inflation targeting. And what are the government initiatives to control the inflation, that will be discussed in chapter 4. And when it comes to chapter 5, it is a medium term outlook. Deregulation drives growth. So what is this deregulation? So during 1991 and 92, majority of the industries were tightly regulated by government itself. That's why it is also known as licensing grasp policy. After 1991 and 92 reforms, the deregulation was the general phenomena in economics, right? So what were the different types of deregulations carried out by government of India to promote the economic growth? That we will discuss in chapter 5. And chapter 6, investment and infrastructure, keep it going. So whether any economy, whether for that matter India or any other developing nation, investments especially in infrastructure, whether these infrastructure should be physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, financial infrastructure. If these investments will be high or regularly investing in these areas, then obviously the economic growth will be very high. So investment and infrastructure criteria for any country will be discussed in this chapter. And chapter 7 exclusively deals with industry. It is all about business reforms. If you keenly observe World Bank ease of doing business index, it was discontinued in 2021 after it found that irregularities. After that, from 2024, it has come up with a new index, Be Ready Index. So it is nothing but how these business reforms will be carried out to enhance the industry competitiveness and at the same time the promotion of employment opportunities. That we will discuss in chapter 7. Chapter 8, new challenges for the old warehouse. So it is nothing but your services sector. So generally after 1991 LPG reforms, the service sector contribution to Indian economy has consistently grown. But today the service sectors is facing different types of doldrums, right? Whether it is in the form of AI, robotics or machine learning. So these will be the service sector's new challenges. Next one is chapter 9, agriculture and food management, the sector of the future. Especially if you look at agriculture sector, the food processing industries and potential exports from India, that will be under the agriculture and food management, especially the future of food processing industries. Next one is climate and environment, adaptation matters. So most of the times if you look at developed countries and least developed countries, they are always fighting against this climate change. Whether climate change is real or not, why should we pay? Especially if you look at US, it is very adamant about climate change. They did not believe in any climate change talks also. So most of the times these climate change funds will be underutilized or underfulfilled. So what were the environmental concerns, and at the same time why adaptation matters for the especially developing nations? So what are the government of India initiatives to tackle these climate and environmental issues? That will be discussed in chapter 10. And when it comes to chapter 11, social sector, extended reaching and driving empowerment, especially the silver economy. Nothing but the grey population and their needs, that will be taken care by government of India. So the social sector, whether they have been extending their reach and whether these policies would initiate any empowerment in these sectors or not, that we will discuss in chapter 11. And when it comes to chapter 12, employment and skill development, existential priorities. So since from last one decade, from 2014 to 2024, majority of the policy makers are economists. What they find in Indian economy especially is jobless growth. What is this jobless growth? Economy is growing and at the same time it is not producing enough jobs. What might be the problem? The problem, majority of the problem is skills. For this purpose, the government of India has come up with a national skill development mission, and at the same time, a dedicated ministry has also created. So, what are these priorities? To scale up the employment opportunities in the Indian economy, and at the same time, for the skill development, what are the different types of government schemes or policies that have been taken for the employment generation? That will be discussed in chapter 12. And chapter 13, labor in the AI era, artificial intelligence era. Crisis or catalyst. Whether AI will take away your jobs or it will be a catalyst to improve jobs. So according to IMF, International Labour Organization, there are some international organizations, especially economic organizations, that have been pointing out that in future most of the jobs will be taken up by AI, artificial intelligence, and whether India is ready to accept this AI era in the labor markets or not, that is going to be a discussion in chapter 13. So if you look at previous year questions, are there any previous year questions based on these type of budget and economic survey? Obviously. So if you look at first question, there has been a persistent deficit budget year after year. So it is continuously budget deficit year after year. So that is the statement. Which action or actions of the following can be taken by government to reduce the deficit? Here the government's priority is to reduce the deficit. So what might be the steps taken by the government to reduce the deficit? The first one is reducing revenue expenditure. Second one, introducing new welfare schemes, rationalizing subsidies, reducing import duty. So if you look at first option, reducing revenue expenditure. So reducing revenue expenditure will be one of the major area where the government is reducing revenue expenditure. So what are the revenue expenditure? Just like your pensions, salaries, these will be some of the components under the revenue expenditure. Obviously, whenever the government is reducing these revenue expenditure, it is going to control the deficit also. So that is the first one. Introducing new welfare schemes. So have you ever wondered why, like Indian economy, along with the majority of the developing nations, economies are always hang around deficits because of welfare schemes and at the same time excessive subsidies. These were the major reasons why majority of the governments are running through budget deficits. So here the option is introducing new welfare scheme. By introducing new welfare schemes, obviously the government incurring additional expenses. So obviously it should not be the answer. Rationalizing subsidies. What is the rationalization of subsidies? Whether the set of people are really required subsidies or not. That will be decided by inclusion and exclusion principles. So if these subsidies are rationalized, obviously the budget deficit will be gradually reduced. And reducing import duty. So here the reducing import duty is nothing but basic customs duty. Let's suppose from 10% to 5% the government is reducing on the critical imports. It will be used for domestic manufacturing. To compete in the domestic markets. So it is not directly related to your deficits. So here 1 incorrect, 4 is incorrect. The answer would be C, 1 and 3 only. So the next one, consider the following statements. Most of India's external debt is owned by governmental entities. Second one, all of India's external debt is denominated in US dollars. So which of the above statements are correct? So if you carefully observe first question, most of India's external debt is owned by government entities. Not only governments, even private sector contribution is also one of the factors determined by external debt. Whether it should be in the form of dollars or rupee, Indian rupees, or any other currencies. All of India's external debt is denominated in US dollars. So by looking at this statement, so all of India's external debt is not obviously in US dollars. There are another currencies under IMF basket of currencies. There are 6 currencies, right? Obviously in 6 currencies, the government is taking loans externally. So obviously not only dollars, but majority of the external debt was dominated in dollars. Next, Indian rupee. So that is the second one. All of India's external debt is denominated in US dollars is wrong. And most of India's external debt is owned by government entities. No, it is also from the corporates also. So here D is the correct answer for this one. So coming to the discussion of first chapter under economic survey, that is nothing but the state of economy, whether it is getting back into the fast lane or under the slow phase. So the global economy, especially in 2024, demonstrated by uneven growth, nothing but the growth around the world, not only in India, has exhibited a different type of numbers, especially in GDP. With geopolitical tensions, since from last 3 to 4 years, the world is raged by different types of geopolitical tensions, whether it should be in the form of Russia-Ukraine war or Middle East tensions and adjacent India's neighborhoods, internal democracies failures. These are some of the geopolitical tensions here. Despite these geopolitical tensions, the 2024, it has demonstrated a steady but uneven growth. Here the positive point is the economic growth is steady and at the same time uneven growth. At one sector, whether agriculture, industries or service, these have exhibited a steady growth but uneven growth. And at the same time supply chain disruptions. These supply chain disruptions was major cause behind the initiation of supply chains resilience initiative after COVID-19 years. So because of lockdowns, these supply chains were obviously affected. The critical components for the manufacturing facilities across the globe have been stopped almost. So after that, the world has realized, why can't we focus only on China? China plus one strategy. There is a China plus one strategy, so that in future, let's suppose if there might be any pandemic, obviously we don't need to worry about our supply chains. That's where the supply chain disruptions have been happened, and climate related shocks, especially these climate induced shocks, not anthropogenic, which influencing the economic stability across the globe. That is the first one. Inflationary pressures eased in many advanced economies. Here, in advanced economies, especially under goods category, it has eased. Inflationary pressure have been eased means the inflation gradually reduced. But there is a problem. Yet services inflation remained persistent. The service sector, which have been contributing a dominating factor for GDP growth, but the inflationary pressure from service sector have not been in a steady down phase. The diverging monetary policy approaches across central banks led to uncertainty in financial markets. So how can we understand this statement? The divergence in monetary policy approach, nothing but, if you look at US case, there is a central bank Fed. In India's case, RBI. Let's suppose Federal Bank has increased its interest rates. Then the investments, especially from foreign portfolio investments under stocks and other debt markets, obviously they will take away their money and they will settle down in US. So obviously that is the capital flight risk. Because of this capital flight risk, currency will be depreciated. So by divergence in different monetary policy stances across the central banks, which led to uncertainty in financial markets. That is the next one. Amidst the global challenges, India's economy remained resilient, supported by strong domestic demand and prudent macroeconomic policies. Despite having these monetary policy approaches in divergence, the Indian economy stood at a resilient mode, and at the same time with the strong domestic demand, and at the same time prudent macroeconomic policies developed by government of India and RBI. Because of these initiations, the India's economy remained silent. So if you look at global economic scenario, the steady growth outlook across country groups. The first one is total world, second one is advanced economies, nothing but developed countries, and EMDS, emerging market and developing economies. If you look at 2023, 24 and 25, advanced economies 2023 1.7, 1.7 and 1.9. That is the next year growth prospect. When it comes to EMDS, it was 4.4 in 2023 and 4.2 in 2024, and 4.2 would be possible next year growth. This is the data from IMF World Economic Outlook, which was published in January 2025. So if you look at global growth trends, the global economy grew by 3.3% in 2023 and is projected to grow 3.2 in 2024 and 3.3% in 2025. This was data given by International Monetary Fund. While the US exhibited stable growth in 2024, which was around 2.8%, and Eurozone struggled at 0.8% due to manufacturing slowdowns, especially in South Eurozone. Next one is inflationary and monetary policy. Inflation rates declined due to tight monetary policies and supply chain adjustments, but services inflation remained high due to wage pressure especially. So here the inflation and monetary policy changes, especially by having tight monetary policies, the inflation has eased, but the service sector inflation does not ease, according to IMF World Economic Outlook 2024 data, which was based on the wage pressure. Nothing but wage price spiral. Because the wages are very high, obviously the companies, what they will do, obviously they will pass on this burden to the consumers. That is one case if you look at inflation. And another one is profit price. Because of greedy nature of these corporates, they are intentionally increasing the prices of inputs, and at the same time they will be passed on to the consumers. That is the profit price model. And second one is geopolitical risk and trade uncertainty. The Russia-Ukraine war, Israel-Hamas conflict and Middle East tensions disrupted global trade especially, which impacting the shipping cost and commodity prices. Because of these tensions around the globe, the shipping cost have been increased. Because of shipping cost improvements increased, the commodity prices, especially oil prices and agriculture commodities, have been consistently raised. That is the data according to OECD 2024. Next one is manufacturing slowdown and services resilience. Manufacturing PMI, Purchasing Managers Index, which showed a contraction especially in Europe and China, while services PMI remained expansionary globally. Here the problem with this manufacturing is only the PMI indication, which is showed a contraction especially in Europe and China. But when it comes to service sector, it has remained expansionary globally according to Standard & Poor Global 2024 data. Next one is India's performance during these global uncertainties. India's real GDP growth for financial year 2025 is estimated at 6.4% according to NSO data, which was driven by agriculture and services, and manufacturing faced global headwinds. Why manufacturing faced global headwinds? Because majority of import goods will be from different countries. Obviously the manufacturing sector, if let's suppose if whether in Europe or China or even in USA, if any manufacturing facilities are facing issues, contraction, obviously the export to India will also be affected. In that way the manufacturing faced a global headwinds, especially from India's perspective. But agriculture and services have been playing an important role. Fiscal prudence, strong external balances and services trade surplus ensured a macroeconomic stability. So if you look at sectors wise, the first one is agriculture sector. Gross value addition growth in agriculture has been grew by 3.8% in 2025, which is supported by Kharif production 1647, 8.2% higher than the 5-year average according to Ministry of Average. Because of Kharif production, the gross value addition growth from agriculture sector has been 8.2% higher than the last 5 years average. Next, favorable monsoons. A normal southwest monsoon improved reservoir levels, aiding Rabi crop sowing, and at the same time which increased by 1.4% in wheat and 0.8% in gram. That is because of favorable monsoons. Next one is food inflation impact. The supply side improvements in agriculture are expected to ease food inflation pressures in financial year 2025. The government is expecting, because of supply chain improvements, whether under ENAM or infrastructure facilities, because of availability of these facilities, the supply side improvements for agriculture commodities will be eased, so that the food inflation will also be reduced in financial year. That is the government of India's expectation. Next, coming to the industry sector. Growth moderation. Industry GVA grew by 6.2% in financial 25, which impacted a weak global demand, monsoon related disruptions and policy uncertainty in export markets. So the industry sector especially has been facing issues because of weak global demand. If there is no demand for our goods, especially from the countries which are regularly importing our goods, obviously the manufacturing facilities in India will also be affected. That is the first case. Second one, policy uncertainty in export markets. Let's suppose if European Union or USA or any other country, if they have been changing their policy, so obviously the export countries, especially from India side, these industry goods will also be affected. Manufacturing slowdown. Despite global headwinds, India maintained the highest manufacturing and PMI in emerging markets, S&P Global. This is the data given by S&P Global. And investment trends. Government capital expenditure increased by 8.2% from July to November 2024, while private sector investment showed early signs of recovery. So which is RBI Industrial Outlook Survey. So these surveys are also very important for your prelims point of view. Sometimes they might frame a questions regarding whether these surveys or outlooks were released by or prepared by which departments. And next one is service sector. Growth in service sector especially, it has been grew at 7.2%, which was supported by finance, real estate and public administration. So because of these three areas, finance, real estate and public administration, the service sector contribution to India's GDP and at the same time gross value addition from service sector has been consistently improved. And trade and tourism, hotel occupancy remained stable, air passenger traffic increased by 7.7%, and services exports strengthened India's trade balance. That is from trade and tourism. Digital and financial growth. IT and financial services expanded, maintaining India's leadership in global service exports. So obviously IT and IT enabled services. These were the two areas where the service sector contribution is very high for India's growth trajectory. And if you look at chart, despite global uncertainty, India's growth remains close to decadal average. Agriculture GVA and industry, services and overall gross value addition in India's economy and at the same time GDP. These were the calculations based on annual and quarterly estimates of GDP at constant prices under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation for the financial year 2025 under the first advanced estimates. And if you take India's macroeconomic performance, inflation control, CPI inflation moderated to 4.9% in financial year 2025. Right, food inflation remains volatile. So here the food inflation still volatile in nature under the inflation bracket. Due to supply shocks, because of supply shocks especially, these food inflation is the concern. And core inflation declined by 0.9%, indicating effective monetary tightening. Because of effective monetary policies, the core inflation declined by 0.9%. Next one is fiscal stability. Fiscal deficit remains under control, so government is not getting enough loans or taking any loans from different institutions. With capital expenditure rising, the capital expenditure capex is rising and at the same time deficits are under control despite election related slowdowns. Because of election year, these capital expenditures are rising and at the same time fiscal deficits remains under the control. And state tax devolution increased by 38.1%, ensuring fiscal sustainability at subnational level, which was the report released by COG, Controller and Auditor General. When it comes to external sector, current account deficit, that was 1.2% of GDP, which was supported by $100 billion in remittances. The remittances report was frequently released by World Bank. And services trade plus. So if you look at India's current account deficit, mostly we have surplus in services, but not in manufacturing capabilities. Foreign reserves are to $634.6 billion, which covering the 90% of external debt, and at the same time over 10 months of imports, which was the calculation released by RBI. Next one is employment and banking. Unemployment declined to 3.2% in 2023-24 financial year with 95.6 lakh EPO enrollments, Employment Provident Fund Organization. So obviously when EPFO enrollments are increased, that means the unemployment is also decreased for the year April-November 2024. Banking sector remains strong with gross NPAs at 12-year low, which is 2.6%, and capital adequacy at 16.7% to absorb any shocks, especially in banking sector. It is also released by RBI Financial Stability Report. And if you look at improvements in employment indicators, labor force participation, working population ratio. So if you look at these report, annual PLFS report for 2023 and 24, this is the data. The labor force participation rate and workers to population ratio, unemployment rate, statistics, these were presented by usual status for persons aged 15 years and above. The data was calculated for the persons aged 15 years and above. So that is the first chapter regarding state of the economy. And what would be the way forward? Obviously, the first one is strengthening investments. Encourage private sector capex to complement public investments. How should it will be done? How can you encourage private sector? So majority of the times the government is taking loans from the markets itself. Then majority of loans were taken by government. Obviously there is a very little space for private players. When money supply is limited, obviously the interest components to borrow these money will be very high. When interest components are very high, obviously the private sectors are not encouraged to take loans. When private sectors are not encouraged to take any loans, obviously the manufacturing employment will be hit. Ensuring order book conversion into real investments in capital goods sectors, which is RBI OBCUS. And diversifying export markets and focusing on high value sectors like semiconductors and biotechnology. If you look at exporting markets, you should not focus only to some countries, right? You should export your markets so that if any importing country is placing any restrictions, then obviously you can skip to those countries and send it to the another alternative markets, so that it will be a better formula for earning forex reserves. And at the same time, high value sectors, which are nothing but semiconductors and biotechnology, these seems to be sunrise industries which has highest potential to earn the remittances also if you export these. And strengthening supply chain resilience against Middle East shipping disruptions. The supply chain resilience will be strengthened so that the Middle East shipping zones will be continuously disrupted, so that the supply chain resilience will be strengthened. And next one is controlling inflation, easing food inflation through supply side interventions and agriculture reforms, whether in the form of ENAM or infrastructure, cold storage facilities, or agri processing zones, export potential zones, whether these are supply side interventions. If you focus on these supply side interventions, obviously the inflation, especially in the food sector, will be cooled down. And maintaining monetary discipline to control services inflation. Next one is structural reforms. Grassroots deregulation to enhance ease of doing business is also one of the major area where you need to focus about your deregulation. And expanding skilling programs for AI and digital transformation to future proof employment. So obviously you need to develop a skill programs for AI tools so that it would be a future proof employment. So while coming to the conclusion, India's economic trajectory remained robust despite global headwinds that we have discussed. What are the different types of global headwinds? With stable inflation because of tight monetary policies and controlled fiscal deficit, the government is also not eagerly taking any loans, and at the same time government is mostly focusing on capital expenditures and strong external balances. While the challenges still persist in the form of strategic reforms, investment acceleration by roping in private sectors, and global competitiveness will sustain India's growth between 6.3 to 6.8 in 2026, reinforcing its position as the world's fastest growing major economy. By focusing on these areas, whether in the form of strategic reforms or investment acceleration and global competitiveness, whether India's products are globally competitive enough to purchase. If you focus on these areas, obviously the India's economy would be a fastest major growing economy. So that is the discussion for first chapter.